When the Chicago outfit killed Sam DeStefano, they used a shotgun. Quick, clean. DeStefano had spent 12 years doing the opposite. Slow, methodical, designed to last. This video covers 5 of the most brutal mafia punishments ever recorded, but every single one reveals the same paradox. Loyalty, the code that built the machine, was also what destroyed the men who enforced it. 5 punishments, 5 unwritten rules. And the court records, autopsy reports, and FBI wiretaps that expose how every enforcer in this video eventually became a victim of the same system they upheld. Case 1. William Jackson. In the Chicago outfit, there was one rule above all others. Never talk to the feds. Chicago, August, 1961. William Action. Jackson was a juice loan collector for Sam DeStefano, a man the FBI had described as the most deranged member of the Chicago outfit. Jackson's job was simple: collect debts, enforce payments, keep his mouth shut. But the FBI had been building a case, and Jackson had been talking. DeStefano brought Jackson to a garage on the west side. What followed lasted 72 hours. Jackson was hung from a meat hook, 300 pounds of body weight suspended by his rectum. The position alone would have caused catastrophic internal tearing. But DeStefano wasn't finished. A cattle prod, delivering between 10,000 and 50,000 volts per discharge, was applied systematically across Jackson's body. Not to inflict maximum damage, to reset consciousness. Every time Jackson's nervous system began to shut down, the electrical current forced it back online. For 72 hours straight, Jackson remained conscious. The cattle prod wasn't a weapon, it was a timer, resetting the clock on suffering every time his body tried to escape. A blowtorch, a shotgun blast to both kneecaps. And when it was over, Jackson's body was stuffed into the trunk of a car and abandoned. DeStefano was never charged for Jackson's murder, but the FBI wiretaps recorded during those years became critical evidence in later federal cases, recordings that would eventually help dismantle the very organization DeStefano had killed to protect. As for DeStefano himself, we'll come back to that. Jackson was punished for talking to the wrong people. But when a father did the same thing in Sicily, the outfit didn't come for him. They came for his 12-year-old son. Case 2. Giuseppe Di Matteo. In Sicily, the code had a different clause. The family of a pentito becomes fair game. Palermo, Sicily. November 23, 1993. Giuseppe Di Matteo, known to his family as Yeppe, was 12 years old when 3 men pulled him into a car outside his riding school. His father, Santino Di Matteo, had broken omertà. He had become a pentito, a state witness against Cosa Nostra. The organization's response was not directed at Santino. It was directed at his son. Giovanni Brusca, the man who had detonated the bomb that killed Judge Giovanni Falcone 1 year earlier, personally oversaw the kidnapping. For the next 779 days, Yeppe was held in a series of safe houses across Sicily. 779 days. For a 12-year-old body still growing, prolonged captivity doesn't just starve, it rewires. Chronic malnutrition triggers muscle wasting, organ deterioration, and hormonal disruption. Growth plates fuse prematurely. And through all of it, consciousness. No sedation. No medical intervention, just time. On January 11, 1996, Brusca's men strangled Yeppe and dissolved his body in a barrel of acid. Sulfuric acid doesn't dissolve organic tissue, it digests it. Proteins denature. Connective tissue breaks into carbon residue. Within hours, a 12-year-old boy was reduced to liquid. Brusca was arrested later that year. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. He cooperated with authorities, testified against dozens of Cosa Nostra members. And in 2021, Giovanni Brusca walked free. The man who dissolved a 12-year-old in acid served his time, cooperated, and was released under Italy's Pentito Protection Program. The Di Matteo family publicly condemned the decision. The Italian public protested. Nothing changed. The Di Matteo boy was collateral, an outsider's child caught in someone else's war. But the organization's most brutal punishments were never meant for outsiders. They were reserved for its own. Case 3. Spilotro Brothers. No one is bigger than the organization. Bensonville, Illinois. June 14, 1986. Anthony "Tony the Ant" Spilotro had run the Chicago outfit's Las Vegas operations for over a decade. He controlled the skim from 4 major casinos. He had become the most recognizable mob figure in America, the inspiration for Joe Pesci's character in Casino. And that was the problem. Tony Spilotro had become famous. In an organization built on invisibility, fame was a death sentence. Tony and his brother Michael were told they were being promoted. A meeting at a house in Bensonville. When they walked into the basement, 14 men were waiting. Michael Spilotro had no involvement in organized crime beyond his brother's name. He owned a restaurant. He had a family. He walked into that basement because Tony asked him to. The beating lasted several minutes. Autopsy reports documented extensive blunt force trauma across both bodies. Fractured ribs, crushed facial bones, ruptured internal organs. Tony Spilotro's injuries were concentrated around the head and torso. Michael's were defensive. Arms raised, palms split open. He died trying to shield himself. Can I say a prayer? 4 words. Anthony Spilotro, a man who had spent decades inflicting violence on others, asked for 30 seconds. They gave him less. Both brothers were buried in a cornfield in Enos, Indiana. Their bodies weren't found until September 1986, 3 months later, 5 feet underground. It took 19 years for anyone to face trial. In 2005, the family secrets case brought 14 murders before a federal jury. Nick Calabresi, the first made member of the Chicago outfit to ever testify, provided the details. Joey, the clown Lombardo, received a life sentence. The code of silence had been broken from the inside. But Spilotro's legacy of violence didn't end in that basement. 24 years before his death, Tony Spilotro had been the one holding an industrial vice against another man's skull. The man behind the vice had already appeared in this video. 24 years later, he would be beaten to death in a basement by the same organization he had tortured for. Case 4. Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia. Don't kill a connected man without authorization. Chicago. May 1962. Billy McCarthy had made a mistake. He and his partner Jimmy Miraglia had killed 2 members of a crew connected to the outfit, without clearance. The organization sent its most reliable enforcer to handle the problem. Tony Spilotro, the same man who would later beg for a prayer in a Bensonville basement, 24 years before that moment, was the one asking the questions. Spilotro brought McCarthy to a garage and placed his head inside an industrial vice. The device was designed to apply gradual, sustained pressure, up to several thousand pounds per square inch across a surface area smaller than a human palm. As the screw tightened, McCarthy's skull began to fracture. Not shatter. Fracture. Slowly, along the cranial sutures, the joints where the plates of the skull meet. The pain would have been beyond description. Cranial pressure triggers a neurological response that the brain cannot override or suppress. There is no adaptation, no threshold. The nervous system interprets it as existential damage, and it responds with total, unrelenting agony. McCarthy broke. He gave up Miraglia's name. Both men were killed. Their bodies were found in the trunk of a car. McCarthy's head visibly deformed from the vice compression. Miraglia's throat had been cut. Spilotro was never charged. The murders were attributed to outfit business and filed away. It took 43 years and the family secrets trial for the full details to emerge. The vice didn't just crush a skull, it crushed the code. The same tool used to enforce loyalty had forced a man to break it. Spilotro used a vice. McCarthy broke under it. But decades earlier, another enforcer had perfected the art of prolonged suffering, and the organization had already decided how his story would end. Case 5. Leo Foreman. Never humiliate a made man. Chicago, 1963. Leo Foreman owed Sam DeStefano money, a debt from a juice loan that had compounded beyond repayment. But Foreman had done something worse than default. He had publicly disrespected DeStefano in front of other members of the outfit. In a hierarchy built on fear and deference, public humiliation was an existential threat. DeStefano's response followed the same blueprint he had used on William Jackson 2 years earlier. Foreman was taken to DeStefano's basement. Over the course of several hours, DeStefano applied a systematic combination of beating, burning, and cutting. Foreman's injuries were extensive. Multiple lacerations, burns across the torso and extremities, and blunt force trauma consistent with repeated strikes from a blunt instrument. But Foreman survived. DeStefano, in what investigators later described as a deliberate display of power, released him. The message wasn't death. It was ownership. Foreman never reported the assault. DeStefano was never charged, and the outfit considered the matter settled. But DeStefano's methods had become a liability. His violence was attracting attention. FBI surveillance, grand jury subpoenas, newspaper coverage. The same techniques that had enforced loyalty for over a decade were now threatening the organization's survival. On April 14, 1973, Sam DeStefano was shot in his garage with a shotgun. Quick, clean. The machine that DeStefano had spent decades serving decided he was the problem. The enforcer became the liability. The torturer became the target. 5 punishments, 5 rules. 5 men who believed loyalty would protect them. Jackson talked to the feds. DeStefano made him suffer for 72 hours. Matteo's father became a witness. Brusca held his son for 779 days. Spilotro became too famous. 14 men beat him to death in a basement. McCarthy killed without authorization. Spilotro crushed his skull in a vice. Foreman humiliated a made man. DeStefano tortured him for hours. Every enforcer in this video upheld the same code. And every one of them, DeStefano, Spilotro, Brusca, was eventually destroyed by the same system they enforced. The code didn't fail because it was broken. It failed because it worked. Loyalty demanded punishment. Punishment created fear. Fear created silence. And silence ensured that the machine kept running, long after it had consumed the men who built it.